Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Writer's Realm podcast, and thanks for joining us on the epic adventure we call writing. We're your hosts,
Holly Robilliard.
and Bob Dotto, and today we're going to talk about writing dark fantasy with Adrienne Miller. Hi, Adrienne.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. I'm so glad we connected, and I asked you what genre you write, and you said dark fantasy, and that got me all excited. That sounds so
Yes.
fun. So tell us about you and your work.
Yeah, so I'm Adrienne Miller. I like to write what I call dark fantasy. Whether it fits the definition, I suppose we'll see later on. I've self-published 3 novels up to this point. My first one called The Traveling City in 2023. Then my second one called Paladin and Necromancer for any D&D fans out there. And then the very innovatively titled sequel, Paladin and Necromancer Part 2,
Mhm.
which last year. Yeah, and I really, really like writing dark fantasy. I really like exploring kind of the psychology of characters, what drives people to commit, acts that we would frame as bad or evil, or anything like that. So that's kind of what's driving a lot of my writing, kind of exploring that psychology.
Okay, can you tell us what was your first book called? What was the name of the first book?
That was The Traveling City.
Traveling City. Was that dark fantasy as well? Or I mean, it's obviously fantasy, but
Yeah, yeah. So
okay, okay.
it explores the idea of like imagine if every wish you had, every thought you had, you could manifest in reality. So that sounds really good for about 5 minutes until you go to sleep and you have a nightmare, and your nightmare literally becomes real, or until you have one of those intrusive thoughts of just like, well, what if I did throw my phone off the bridge or something
Mm,
like
yeah.
that. So the idea of the traveling city is, what if everybody had that power all at the same time? How do you run a
Mm,
society like that without everybody inadvertently killing each other all the time?
wow. Yeah, that is going to run into some conflict.
Yes.
Um, Now, what is Paladin and Necromancer about?
Well, it's about a paladin and a necromancer, and there was a kind of a really, really huge war, cataclysmic event. Humanity was on the brink of being defeated by a kind of unknown enemy who came from transplanetary portals. A paladin and necromancer were fighting on the side of humanity, and as it happens in wartime, they fell in love. And because it looked like the world was going to end, they thought, well, it doesn't really matter. We might as well get married. It's romantic, right?
Hmm.
And then the world didn't end. They somehow managed to pull it back, and humanity survived, and the enemy retreated through their portals. And now you have a paladin and a necromancer who are married, and the god who he serves really, really hates necromancers. So
Oh boy.
how do they kind of negotiate this? There's a lot of duty versus freedom versus love kind of negotiations,
Hmm.
solve mysteries together, because I love fantasy mysteries.
Oh, nice, nice. Okay, okay. Well, that sounds lovely. And how can we find you?
So all my books are on Amazon, and I also have a website where you can order signed copies of the books or art prints that I've made based on the books, and they're all linked via my Instagram, which is just at Adrienne_Miller_author.
Okay, and for the listeners, it's how do you spell your name?
Adrienne, and then Miller is just Miller.
Okay, and same with your website. Well, it sounds like everything can be found if we have Instagram. You just go
Yeah,
there and find all your links.
yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
I'm so excited. First of all, I have to say I agree with you on the fantasy mystery. I'm hooked on mystery right now, and I love fantasy, so I totally get it. But as I know, we're not here to talk about that today. For our listeners who are new to fantasy or are new to writing, what makes a book dark fantasy?
Hmm.
Um, if you were talking to someone who was new, who had never heard about this before, this genre, to you, what do you feel defines your books as dark fantasy?
Right. Yeah. This is the big difficult. So I'm no expert in dark fantasy, but the way that that definition makes sense to me. Or the way I define it is, you have your classical epic fantasy, kind of Tolkien, where the heroes go on a quest, and it's fundamentally kind of based around the adventure and defeating some kind of evil, often, a kind of larger than life evil or environmental evil or that kind of thing. Whereas with dark fantasy, I think more of works like, The Witcher, or things like
Mm,
that have a kind of focus on morally gray characters where nobody's really the good guy. Everybody makes questionable decisions. It's often, choosing the lesser evil out of many evil, out of, impossible choices, rather than having a morally righteous hero who kind of always makes the right decision or often makes the right decision. You also have dark fantasies that kind of veer into horror territory, or ones that just, really, really delve into kind of character psychology. With main characters going mad, becoming unreliable narrators, that kind of
mm.
wheelhouse.
Okay. What are there any other books that you read? They're like, oh my gosh, I love this. I would like to write a book like this.
Yeah, so
Influences.
yeah, two that really, really, or three that really influenced me, I would say are, well, two of them are older fantasy books. One being Michael Moorcock's Eternal Heroes series,
Oh yeah. Okay.
Elric of Melniboné.
Mm-hmm.
They have a very morally questionable hero who
Yeah.
basically, he never makes a good choice. He also serves an arguably very evil god, but he also never has any good choice he can make.
Mm,
Um, Also, what I find really, really compelling about Elric is he's kind of, I wouldn't say he's a disabled character, but he relies on kind of medications to keep himself
mm,
alive.
mm,
And sometimes, in order to kind of keep up, he has to make very questionable decisions. So, for instance, he does pledge himself to a god of chaos, because that god literally keeps him alive.
mm,
And that kind of those kind of dilemmas I find really interesting.
mm.
um, and then I also really like C.G. Cherry's The Morgaine Chronicles. I don't
Mm.
know.
I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah, it's another kind of older fantasy saga, but it centers on Morgaine, who is a cross planner and cross time traveler, who has to, basically she has to close all the gates behind her, which locks people in on their respective planets, and
Mm,
sometimes really not an easy choice, because, for instance, in one book she locks people on a world that is drowning because all the seas are rising, and it's like her companion is like, what the hell are you doing, like, we're
mhm,
leaving here to die, but then she is on this quest to kill to close all the gates, because that is going to save humanity as a whole. So you have this kind of, again, lesser of
mhm.
dilemma.
Yeah. Now you mentioned psychology a few times. Do you have a background in psychology, like a professional background, or is it just something?
Just an interest. Yeah.
Okay, okay, yeah. No, you're right. There, the dilemmas you brought up dilemmas, and that's I feel like that's should be the basis for any author. There should be a dilemma that the your main character has to make. Otherwise, it's a boring read.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. How do you come up with your dilemmas in your books?
Um, oh, that's a good question. I always try to I always focus my books on a kind of relationship between initially two people, and I try to come up with a dynamic that would be interesting. So, for instance, the obvious example is the paladin and the necromancer, right? You have the servant of a righteous god, and then you have the necromancer. So you have tension apparently, but then to make that tension interesting, you can't just have the paladin be right all the time, because that's what
Mm,
the audience expects, and then that's boring, right?
yeah.
So I have the necromancer making, in the book I have her making very, very evil choices that kill a lot of people, but in order to save more people in the end. And then
Hmm.
that whole kind of, conflict that doesn't have a good resolution of, like, fundamentally the trolley dilemma, right? Is it
Right.
okay save more people by killing fewer, or is that always fundamentally the wrong choice? And they butt heads over that quite often.
Yeah. Wow.
So
That's
I know
a lot of tension in there.
I know you had mentioned that moral ambiguity and like morally gray characters plays into a lot of what you like to write. So with it being dark fantasy, what about things like what role does darkness and dread play in your stories? Maybe compared to like a horror, right? Because there has to be that boundary. So how do you kind of get close to that but not cross over into that other genre with your work?
Yeah, I do struggle with that a little bit because I really, really enjoy horror as well. And I think for me, it's just a kind of matter of I create a kind of quiet dread, I suppose, in my stories. Whereas horror, I think a lot of time it does actively try to scare you. And I'm trying to write a horror book, but I'm not very good at scaring people. I keep reading it back myself, and I'm just like, this is kind of boring. The kind of quiet dread I'm trying to develop is just giving people the sense more and more that fundamentally the world that's inhabited by the heroes doesn't work. So with the traveling city, for instance, you have this. So the main character is kind of a peacekeeper in this society who tries to make sure that people don't, manifest anything that's going to harm other people or that's going to destroy the city. And you get the sense as the story continues that the system these peacekeepers have set up is one, fundamentally unfair, and two, fundamentally doesn't work. So it's more this kind of quiet world building dread of like, oh, where's this going to lead? Like, what's going to happen to our characters like at the end of this? I'm kind of inspired quite a lot by Kazuo Ishiguro's work. Like I've like Never Let Me Go. There isn't any horror that happens to the characters, but at the end of the book, spoiler alert, sorry, their organs are going to be harvested. And the
Mm.
characters kind of accept that. So there is kind of a quiet dread in that, and you wish that didn't happen. But I don't think it's quite a horror novel in that there aren't any scary moments. You just kind of know at the end this isn't leading anywhere good.
Right.
I love that the difference between those two, right? Because I find I love horror. I've always like I grew up watching horror movies with my dad since I was like a little girl. And so I love anything that's scary. And that's something that I've kind of seen a lot of the horror movies transition into now is they're kind of defining their genre as things that are just like pop out scary.
Yeah,
Or they try to just intentionally like visually scare you, whether it's the way that something looks, like if it's a creature, or the way that the person looks, or the scene. And so they don't always have that like internal, like they're not really building anymore on that like internal feeling of dread. And so I love that because for me, that I find is more terrifying is as it's slowly building up, like you said. And you're kind of slowly taking your readers on that journey of like, something's coming and we want to get to the end of the book because we want to find out what's happening, but also we know something bad is going to happen at the end of the book. So it's like you want to get there, but you don't want to get there. And I love that.
yeah, me too. I completely agree with you. Like, I love watching horror movies with my partner. It's like the main kind of thing we watch. But so many of them are just like so reliant on like cheap jump scares now. Whereas we watched one a couple of nights ago, which I can't remember the name. It's an indie horror movie, but it was basically, it never showed any of the characters, and it was kind of like grainy and just showed you a corner of the room at any one time. But you kind of had to infer by sound what was happening, and that was so much more scary because you
Mm.
were everything that was going on, and the protagonists were two little children, and you're just like, oh my god, what's going to happen to these kids?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I'm going off on a tangent, but we were talking about horror, and I don't know if you got. Yeah, you just said, Adrian, that you watched television. Has anyone watched Alien Earth?
No, I have not seen it
It's
yet.
a perfect. It is science fiction. They're not in space. Obviously, it's Earth, but oh my gosh. And there's so many there's like three or four different stories going on at the same time, and all of them have an element of horror in them, and it's just constant tension, constant dread, and I can't speak highly of it enough. I highly recommend it. I know it's like I said, it's kind of science fictiony. It's not fantasy. It's not, but like, oh my gosh, please, it's so well written. Please give it a try. All right, that's my commercial.
Yeah, I've watched a bunch of the other Alien movies, so that's definitely going on the list now.
Oh, please do. Yes, you're not going to be disappointed. It is like if they've, I mean, each one is an hour long, but like this was it would be an amazing movie if they put it all together. It'd be crazy. All right. So anyway, that's it. Sorry, that was my tangent. But so what are some other elements that you would want to include if you're writing dark fantasy? Where's some like maybe two or three or however many like main elements of dark fantasy?
Hmm. I think for me, what I find really interesting is kind of playing with the idea of what reality is. So I've mentioned, in the traveling city, people can just manifest whatever they want. So if you keep concentration on whatever you've manifested, that thing is going to stick around. But what happens when you lose concentration or when you die or something like that? That's kind of, I find a really interesting dilemma that the characters have to deal with. Because one of the main characters is literally a nightmare. It's a nightmare that a young girl had, and she doesn't know what happened to the girl. She doesn't know if the girl is still alive. She doesn't know what's happening. She doesn't know, well, if I'm a nightmare, am I supposed to be kind of frightening people? Am I supposed to be a bad person? Like, how can I define my destiny? And also, if the girl is going to die at some point, am I going to die? Like, there's a real sense of existential dread in that for her. Um, so that I found really interesting to explore, this
Mhm.
kind of what what's the boundary between the imagined and the real, because like that's something I think readers can really identify with, because to
Mhm.
us, worlds we read about that have been imagined are real. So it's kind of what happens if you um kind of cross that boundary, I suppose, metaphorically and literally.
Mhm. So you might have just answered this question with that in a way, but what do you think draws readers into the world of dark fantasy? Like, what is it about like these darker, more unsettling worlds that people gravitate towards?
I think it's this fear and or belief that we have, that there is like a real darkness in everybody. And it's sort of satisfying or cathartic to see that explored, because I think sometimes it's like, don't get me wrong, like I love Lord of the Rings so much, like everything to do with it, but it's hard to identify with any of the characters because they're so heroic, right? You
Right. Yeah.
like to think that you'd be as heroic as Frodo or Sam, but like I think a lot of us go like, at the idea of walking for even like 5 hours, we're like, nope, I'm out. Like
Yeah.
I find that, at least for me personally, like, it's sometimes more easy to identify with characters who are like, weak or cowardly or like morally questionable, who take the easy way out. There is like a satisfaction in that because it's easy to identify with that
Mhm.
or understand that. Um, so I think there is like a real intrigue in that, and I think there's also like um, a sense of characters who have like really dark backstories or mysterious motivations. It's just interesting, right? When you first start reading The Witcher, or you play the game, or you watch the show, it's like, what is up with Geralt? What
Mhm.
happened there? Like, there is a real mystery to unraveling. Like, why is this person this gruff? Why is he so harsh to everybody? Like, what happened? So I think that's like, yeah, there's this element of unraveling what made a character like who they are. Whereas with a hero, it's a little bit more straightforward. They're a good person because probably they had a good upbringing, or because okay, they rose against impossible odds and kind of forged their personality out of the fire. But I think there's a real intrigue in trying to find out what made somebody who's cowardly or selfish or power hungry, like, why are they like that? What are they overcompensating for? What drives them to be like that?
I absolutely love that. I think it's so important. And I think that's something that I think it's one of those things with characters that comes the more you write, the more you understand how important that is. Because I mean, it's the same thing with human beings, right? We all have a backstory, and the person that we are now is not the same person we were 10 years ago, but everything that's happened within the last 10 years has helped shape us now. And so that's kind of one of the things we always talk about is, you don't want to have a character be bad just for the sake of being bad. There has to be a reason for that. And the more intricate that reason is over time, the better it builds out that character. And so I absolutely love that.
No, I really, really like that as well. And I like kind of giving I don't know, deconstructing kind of beliefs that we socially don't really question very much. Like this isn't a book, but one anime I really, really love is Madoka Magica. And one of the aspects that it explores is the idea that being selfless ultimately isn't it's not just unproductive for you because it's ultimately unsustainable, but being selfless to the point where you literally destroy yourself or you're taking yourself so far back that it makes your life unlivable, can cause much more dreadful harm later down the line, because fundamentally at some point you're going to snap and then you've set up a state where you feel like you can't get out of anymore. So I really like exploring the idea of, like, these things that we hold to be virtuous. What could be a kind of a situation when they aren't virtuous anymore, where they actually serve to drive conflict or devastation or horror in a way.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that. So when we're writing dark fantasy, it sounds like you mostly focus on the characters first,
Yeah,
like their dilemma, not necessarily the world building dilemma.
yeah,
Is that
for
true?
that is definitely true. Yeah, I'd definitely describe my books as character focused. In fact, the Paladin and Necromancer is a mystery, and I would not recommend this to anybody. But I started writing it just because I loved the character interactions so much. I had no idea how the mystery was going to be solved. I just set up this mystery.
Yeah.
I don't know who the killer is. Like, no, out in 8 or something, when I realized, oh, this actually has legs. I think I want to publish this. When I was like, okay, I've got to sit down and really focus on who do I think did it?
Right.
How does it all tie together with the world building? And then I had to edit the first 8 chapters many, many times.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like you're a pantser, right? You're a discovery writer.
Usually I'm a plotter, but with that one, I was definitely a
Oh,
pantser.
okay. All right.
I like
Um,
that. I used to be a planner, and then as I started planning and then I started writing, I realized that my characters didn't always follow my plan. And so my plans often went awry. And so now I'm kind of like in between the two. So I'll do like an outline and kind of figure out what direction I want to go to get from point A to B. And then I just let my characters kind of fill in the middle. And if we have to take a little bit of a detour, then that's what we do. And it's a
Yeah.
lot less stressful for me because then I'm not like, what are you doing? No, you're supposed to be doing this.
But that works so well because then your characters behave in a really organic way, because it just develops out of, you know, what's happening in the story. Sometimes it just occurs to you in the moment, like, this would actually make much more sense. And then
Absolutely.
So,
So
and are your characters moving towards, or the stories that you write, are they moving towards a hopeful ending, or is it more, let's just see how we can get out of this predicament page after page, or, you know what I'm saying? Like they're just kind of working to solve the current problem, or is there more like, again, we'll bring up the Lord of the Rings. Hey, if we just destroy this ring, all evil's leaving. You know, is there anything like that in writing dark fantasy?
um no, I think part of dark fantasy is there are no neat endings like that, and I think
Okay.
that's another characteristic of it, that you're not left with that like, they
Right.
made.
Dissatisfied, yeah.
Yeah, it's more of a kind of again, I'll use that term catharsis. It's like that Aristotelian idea. Sorry, I'm a classicist. Of evoking fear and dread in the audience, and that the feeling of relief comes more out of, like, oh, thank God I'm not in that situation.
yeah.
So, Paladin and Necromancer 1, for instance, ends with like, I mean, you always have to give your reader a sense of resolution, otherwise the book isn't satisfying. So I think all books should be able to be read kind of as a concluded story. I think stories that leave you on a cliffhanger at the end of the book is not ideal, structurally speaking. So it wraps up the mystery of part one, but it definitely sets up a kind of, a sense of dread in the main characters discover something they really can't leave as it is. But the way in which the paladin and the necromancer would solve that issue is, again, fundamentally at odds with each other. So you kind of get a sense that while things are good right now and the current crisis has been averted, there is an even bigger one coming kind of later down the line. So and then it is a duology, so it's a finished series. So at the end of part two, I do try to wrap up all loose ends, but it's more psychologically. There are questions like, say, did the characters go too far in solving the current story? Is there going to be a possibility of redemption for them later down the line? Could they live with what they've done? So there's always that sense of like lingering dread, lingering lack of resolution, I suppose.
Okay.
So you published a book in 2023, 2024, and 2025. So I must know, what is your writing routine like?
Yeah.
Right. So 2023 was sort of cheating because I quit my job, so I had like a lot of free time while I was sorting out, being self-employed and all of that. And I must admit, I had another lecturing job in 2024, and while I did that, I wrote nothing. So it was a lot of like leftovers from 2023. Now I've moved on. I work in cybersecurity now, something very different from classics. But now I've kind of started forcing myself into a routine. So I try to either write or edit for an hour or 2 hours in the morning, depending on how heavy my day is. And I just try to do that like every day of like Monday to Friday. I don't really write on the weekends because I need to recharge. And to me, writing is something I try to treat like work, because I think if I treat it like a hobby, I don't produce as much as I'd like, or I'm not as rigorous with myself as I'd like. I just try to get it all done as part of my regular kind of work week, and that kind of holds me accountable. But I mean, that works for me. That probably wouldn't work for other people. I don't I don't
Yeah.
know.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah, one a year. And then you have more planned, right?
Yeah. So my next book is hopefully coming out at the start of November. I just got my proof copy
Wow.
yeah.
Good for you.
That's not dark fantasy for once. That's dark sci-fi.
That's fantastic. Well, it's probably like George Lucas would tell you, Star Wars is not science fiction. It's space fantasy. So
Yeah, I
that's
would
probably
agree.
it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's exciting. I forgot my question. I do that constantly. Yeah, I had something, and now I don't remember what it was. But
You just got overwhelmed by thoughts of Star Wars.
yeah, that's all it takes. Now I have lightsabers and TIE fighters in my head just flying around. Let me think. Yeah, no, I don't know. Holly, do you have anything? I seriously can't.
Yeah, for sure. So when it comes to writing different scenes, whether it's like a battle scene, an intimate scene, dialogue, what do you find is the most difficult for you to write?
Hmm.
I know we all kind of have like that one thing that we're like, oh, this sucks to write, but I
Yeah,
have to do it.
Yeah.
definitely. I think probably fight scenes, because I think my problem is I never enjoy reading them, so I don't have a
Hmm.
sign of how to write them. Like I don't. One of the things I love about this book I mentioned earlier, the Morgaine Chronicles, is that it's so focused on the moments between the battles. Like most of the book is just the main characters camping and
Hmm.
talking about their day as they're camping, and I love that because
Mhm.
it's so different. It's such a different way to approach epic fantasy, because it's so focused on like reflexivity rather than action.
Hmm.
Um, but sometimes you need to write a battle scene, right? Sometimes something needs to happen. So that's definitely one that I struggle with. And like, especially if you have an ensemble cast, you're like, okay, what's Rayhan doing? What's Ellis doing? What's Philippe doing? And like, I've had it before where I used to write Baldur's Gate fan fiction. It's not published, so nobody can find it. Baldur's Gate 2, rather, not 3. I'm old enough to have played 2.
Nice.
But party of 6 people, and then you're like, okay, so what's Minsk doing? What's Jira doing?
Yeah.
That was doing. And sometimes it's just overkill. You're like,
Yeah.
okay, people cast fireball now. I don't know. I think they're dead.
Right. Yeah, so it sounds like you mentioned D&D earlier. So do you have a background with you play some Dungeons and Dragons, or and now I obviously you play Baldur's Gate, which is very much D&D. I mean, just video
Yeah,
form.
I played it, like all the computer games like Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, Winter Nights, all of that. I absolutely love Baldur's Gate 3 when it was announced. I was so happy.
Yeah.
Play D&D like things with some of my friends doing while I was doing my PhD. So I think that kept us all sane. Like fight imaginary monsters, got us through the week.
That's fun. Do you have a palette cleanser? Like if you're writing this all the time, are you reading currently dark fantasy while you write, or do you read something kind of light and fluffy and then get back to the work of what you're doing?
Yeah, I do need a palate cleanser every now and again. I definitely read dark fantasy as well, but I also read a lot of nonfiction, so that's kind of, is good to clear your palate a little bit. So I think when I'm writing more fantasy, I read more science fiction, and then the other way around.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
How do you do your research for your worlds? Like, are your worlds like present time, or because it's still fantasy, do you do some world building just secondary to the characters, or what does
Yes.
that look like?
Um, it was so with Paladin and Necromancer, it was quite D&D inspired. But so a lot of that was kind of, I suppose, done for me. Although I put it in more like a gas lamp setting, so people have guns and things like that. So one of the ideas
Okay.
is that through cataclysms like the one I'm describing at the start of the book, society keeps being thrown back to kind of an earlier state. So you have these remnants of technological innovations that were just kind of left or forgotten about. So you kind of have people living on
Okay.
ruins. With the traveling city, the world building was not easy because I like in a world where you can imagine anything, so
Yeah.
don't work, right? Initially, I had characters paying with money, and then I realized that makes no sense because like create money. So at some point, I really wanted to have a casino heist scene, and I was very excited about that. So I definitely wanted to leave it in, but then I was like, well, what do you gamble with? So yeah, the world building for that took me quite a while. But I did get some reviews saying that the world building made complete sense, even though it's such an out there idea. So I was like, okay, all these hours of agonizing over it paid off at least.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be tough, I feel like. And I think there would be like it would be so difficult because I feel like you're constantly like, oh, now I want to do this, and now I want to do this, and now I want to do this, and it's like trying to keep all of that in a way that makes sense. Must have been so difficult.
Yeah.
It really was. It's
So
very I'm part of a writing group with some local friends, and I'm writing a short story for an anthology. One of them is going to release at some point. And the idea is kind of that people, it's kind of a dystopian idea that people can change their entire appearance, and trying to address the question of what does that do with identity? What does that do with concepts like race or age or beauty or things like that? And I wanted to have this scene where the main character goes into a bathroom and she sees like this kind of in that world TikToker or YouTuber, like she admires like some kind of a beauty influencer person, and I had her go into the bathroom and recognize and realize, oh, she's like literally in the middle of remolding her entire face, and she gets really freaked out by how that looks. And then my friend very rightly pointed out, well, how is she recognizing her? Half her face is melting off currently. And I was like, oh yeah, really just make
Right.
sense
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Hence the importance of writing groups, you know, for new writers. Definitely either in Discord or somewhere, find a writing group somewhere because you do need feedback like that. Some all the little details that we don't think about as writers.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So how, you know, I don't know if you noticed this, but in all the books, including yours, you mentioned a god or gods to follow. How important is religion in writing dark fantasy? I don't know if
Mm,
we're going to call it religion, but you know what I'm talking about.
yeah, no, for sure. I think it's a great way of setting up that dread that we've been talking about, right? Because, we're kind of socially conditioned to think of a god as something protective, right? Something that is going to give our lives meaning, something that is going to help us, so flipping that whole idea on its head of having gods that could be spiteful or that could be working against humanity, as it happens in Paladin and Necromancer, this idea that the gods are evil and they're out there to kill you. I think that's
Right.
very, that's a very, very good way of making people feel. I think part of dark fantasy is that feeling of disempowerment.
Hmm.
Um, I think that's a really good way of making people feel disempowered, Nick. You're not
Mm.
against a scary monster, but you're up against a scary monster that might have created the world that you live in.
Oh, there you go. That's a great way to put it. Like you're not necessarily a servant or you're subservient, but like you almost don't have a choice,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Just like, I don't know, somebody living out in the desert. Like, hey, I wish it would rain, but I don't have a choice. Like I need to dig for water or what have you. So that's a
Yeah.
good way to look at it. Like that.
Are there any misconceptions about the genre that you would like to clear up? Like anything that when you mention you write dark fantasy, is there anything that people kind of automatically jump to and you're like, no, no, it's not quite like that?
Um, hmm, that's interesting. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Um, I think related to that, there's an aspect of dark fantasy that I was talking to a friend about at one point that we were kind of both a little bit annoyed at, which is this. I do like writing romance as part of my stories. Like I always have like a main relationship that's kind of established. Whether that lasts or not. But I think a lot of dark fantasy has romance, like romantasy or whatever. Um, but sometimes, or in a lot of dark fantasy, I find that initially, especially the male character, often looks like, oh, they're really, they're evil, they're dark, broody, and like morally grey. And then you find out as you continue reading, oh no, they were perfectly justified in everything they did, and they were just terribly misrepresented by the actual the actual baddie, and they're actually a really, really caring and great partner. And I think those stories are perfectly fine, and they obviously they're popular for a reason. They absolutely are justified in existing. But I think what we then sometimes miss out on is using dark fantasy as a way of exploring like the darkness that could also exist between relationships, that tension or that sometimes threat, like that toxicity that can develop between people, even if they genuinely love each other. If they're, for instance, on like opposing sides of a conflict,
Mhm.
you can't really have like, um, you know, difficult or unhealthy dynamics that do develop with people lying to each other, threatening each other, and not just in a kind of not threatening each other just in a sexy way as it often happens in dark fantasy, but like genuinely, like you don't know if the heroes are going to end up on the same side of the conflict, and sometimes they don't. And I think sometimes that's not explored as much in what I'd say dark romantasy, what I'd call dark romantasy, as I think it could be, because
Mhm.
yeah, it's an interesting part of human relationships, and I think as long as you don't glorify it, it's something that could be explored more.
Hmm.
That's really interesting, and I've never really thought about it that way before, but that's it's so true because I feel like in a lot of the romantasy novels, right? Like you said, the person is lying to them and they're being deceitful, but it's always justified.
Uh,
And so I'm curious in terms of, a regular real life relationship, we're kind of like glorifying that and we're providing excuses and saying, hey, yeah, maybe they're lying to me for a reason, or maybe it's, what's best for me. And so I can only imagine psychologically what all of these novels that are constantly reinforcing that belief that it's okay that they're lying because there's a reason for it. What's that doing to us, as a population as a whole? Because now we're constantly reading these stories where that sort of deceit is justified. But in
Mm.
reality, most of the time when people are lying to you or being deceitful or doing things they're not supposed to be doing, it's actually very wrong. It's very wrong. And so we're kind of glorifying that, making excuses. And you ever talk to your girlfriends and that's the first thing that they say is, oh, well, they're trying to do it just because of this reason and it's fine. And maybe I'm just, making it become a big deal. And it's like, no, you're justified in what you're saying, and their actions should not be justified.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it also sets like unrealistic expectations, doesn't it, for how
Yes.
other people should behave in relationships or how we should behave in relationships? Because like, if you always have the two parties kind of framed as behaving perfectly, like that's again not relatable because everybody's an asshole to their partner sometimes, just because they're hungry, and then realize and had a pizza and then they're like, oh shit,
Absolutely.
so sorry.
Hangry.
Everybody makes mistakes sometimes, and just I'd rather have those be framed as mistakes in fiction and kind of showing, okay, how can characters maybe come back from that, or what are the reasons they might double down on that and kind of go down a kind of downward spiral. I'd rather have it be framed kind of in a little bit more, with a little bit more honesty and frankness, rather than say, oh, this thing that looks like a mistake or that thing that looks like it was really dodgy, actually, we're going to go out of our way and justify it
Mm,
um, by bending the world around our heroes.
mm.
Rather than acknowledge that, well, sometimes our protagonists, do make bad choices and then they have to deal with the consequences, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think as well, it kind of tips a little bit on the, like the forgive and forget saying, right? And I notice in a lot of novels, people's characters will forgive someone for something, but then they
Yeah.
immediately act like it never happened. And
Yeah.
in reality, most people will forgive someone for something, but there's always going to be that lingering bad taste, at least for a little while. And so that's something that I always struggle with. And when I'm reading novels and they're like, someone did something terrible, okay, I forgave you. And now
Yeah.
we're just going to go back to as if it never happened. And in reality, like that's not that's not how it is. And so those characters to me feel like they're a little bit false because, that's not how you would act.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Or this idea that, if a character has like apologized for something or like said, oh, I want to change, that change happens instantaneously. Like, I feel like, a lot of us, if we say, okay, I really want to change this thing about myself, you're gonna slip back sometimes, or you're
mhm.
gonna back into kind of old habits. So and the road towards character growth isn't necessarily straight and narrow. There's gonna be times when the characters kind of fall off the wagon again, or sometimes
Mhm.
when think, okay, this character is really going to grow, and then they don't because things don't work out that way, or because they're not strong enough to stick with it. And I think those stories are really interesting, and we don't, yeah, like we shouldn't shy away from them because
Mhm.
that's
Well, how important are character arcs in dark fantasy? Are
mm,
they still very important? Like, no, we're going to see Joe struggle and work through his problems, and in the end, he's a better person because that's the usual. The framework for a story arc is yeah, find challenges, and then I'm stronger, better, faster now at the end of it. But maybe with dark fantasy is a little different.
I think you still have the kind of general story arc structures of either, okay, the character, works towards a sort of betterment, whether that's personal betterment or just bettering their situation, or a worsening, right? They become a worse person or their situation develops in a catastrophic way. I think those are like generally the kind of two character arcs that we're familiar with, and you still have them in dark fantasy, or you do still have them in dark fantasy, but you know, it, it just sort of the you have to maintain that darkness or that dread for it to fit the genre, I think. So either, you'd have a character who's, personally, this is what I try and do in one of my books I haven't published. The character has a genuine epiphany that helps him overcome a lot of the anxieties that he's had or paranoias that he's had, but it fundamentally doesn't make a difference because the world is still, not set up for him to succeed. So you can kind of have that sense of, oh yay, they've had like character development, but fundamentally, it still ends on a kind of a dark note or a somewhat depressing note. Or you can obviously have a character arc where a hero descends into a villain. You can like the corruption arc. Suppose you could even have, I mean, I'd call something like Tokyo Ghoul, dark fantasy, where like you have a surprisingly light ending. Again, sorry, spoilers. But entire show as you watch it is incredibly dark, but then
Mhm.
somehow everything is fine.
That's funny. Yeah. Um, God, I just had another thing and it's just gone again. Oh, you mentioned this happens when you hit over 50. It's coming, guys. Don't worry. Um, you mentioned during the character arcs that the character wants to make their world better for them. And I feel like that's a great opportunity for something in dark fantasy because that sounds, I mean, it's selfish. Like, no, I need to make my space safe for me or better for me. And that means I need to get rid of, that means genocide or something, like I'm thinking of Thanos, in the movies, in Endgame, or not Endgame, it was Infinity Wars, where he's like, yeah, if I get rid of half of humanity, then we don't, everyone will live a much more peaceful life. Like I think that'd be a great place. And also, so that's a two-part. If you agree with that, and also another maybe a second question or a second part to this is where's the line at between your main character slash hero and villain?
I love that. Yeah. So to answer the first part, I completely agree with you. I think that's such a cool storyline to explore. And in fact, I would say that for me, there is no line.
Hmm.
Uh, I'm going to spoil a little bit for Paladin and Necromancy here just because it's relevant. The Paladin, Cass, he finds out that, even though he is a stand-up guy and he's, really concerned with trying to help other people, the god he's been serving is fundamentally corrupt.
Hmm.
Like, just been serving basically an evil god the entire time.
Hmm.
His wife, the necromancer Silva, at some point committed what could be described as a genocide, but she did it in order to save the rest of humanity. There wouldn't be any more humanity if she hadn't done that. So
Right.
it's kind of, to a lot of people, she is a villain, including Cass, for
Hmm.
a lot of the novel. And the main kind of antagonist of the book is fundamentally she's fighting the corrupt gods.
Hmm.
So to a lot of people, she would be the good guy. She
Hmm.
would be the hero, and she's until the end. She sees herself completely as the hero in what she's trying to do. And part two does somewhat redeem her as well. In that, she probably had the right idea the entire time because she was trying to free humanity from gods that were ultimately corrupt and were trying to control them, even though at the same time the gods were also giving them, gifts, divine magic. So it's kind of,
Hmm.
a lot of, what's the word? You give them bread and games in the way that the Romans did.
Hmm. Okay, just entertain yourselves kind of thing. Hmm.
Yeah, I think
Interesting.
for the most interesting dark fantasy, I think there is no line between hero and villain. I think the hero could very easily slip into the role of the villain and, you know, figuring out, okay, was this decision they made the right one to make in this situation or the wrong one? Like negotiating those dilemmas, I think, is what makes it interesting.
Hmm. Yeah, I can see that.
If there was an author who wanted to get into writing dark fantasy, what is the advice that you would give them? Like, where would you tell them to start if they wanted to start writing a dark fantasy novel?
Hmm. I think I would always say to start with a theme that interests you and work around that theme. So, for instance, in all of my books, basically, the theme that really interests me is this idea between duty and freedom. And for me, a lot of the time, freedom is interlinked with love. In how far do you have to adhere to duty for things to just work, for society to function, for you to have like what you'd consider to be a meaningful life, or in how far can you derive the most meaning from a sense of freedom, from a sense of individualism. So I would say to pick a theme that really interests you, a theme that has some grit, some teeth that you can really do something with, and then to move on to characters from there to kind of see, okay, what are some interesting characters that could have a conflict about this? Because for any story, you need a conflict, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then to kind of see where that takes you. Although me saying that is how I would start, and that is, I think, how you get interesting character-driven novels. But I know some people, especially in fantasy, they're more world builders. So a lot of people I know start with the world, and I think that's perfectly fine. If you have a really cool idea for a world, definitely start there. But I think the best stories, are ones where the world also reinforces the conflict. In the traveling city, the conflict is reinforced by the fact that in that world, you can create anything you want. You can do anything you want. So it really heightens this sense of, freedom. Ultimate freedom is possible, but it's also incredibly threatening. So if you can somehow link the world building to your main conflict, to your main theme, in a way that would drive the character arcs forward, I think that's the best way to go about it. But I feel like by that description, I've just done the meme where I go like, oh, to draw an owl, just draw a circle and that, and draw the rest of the owl.
There you go. It's super easy. No, I mean, we all know how difficult writing is. I mean, we do have this podcast. We talk about that constantly. So yeah, it's all a challenge, all of it, but there's ways to do it. What is too dark? Do you think there's anything that's like, whoa, this is a little bit too much?
Um, the idealist in me wants to say no as long as you are responsible with your trigger warnings. Although I will say, things that are just done for the sake of gratuity, there is a question around, if you can't justify it, does it need to be in there? So, one thing I was taught once in a writing course is like, if there's no really, really important reason, like story or character reason for there to be like an explicit rape scene in the story, like it doesn't need to be there. Like if you can't justify it, it doesn't need to be there. So that's generally my approach. Like, or anything upsetting, one thing I always think of is I've got a dog, as I mentioned to you earlier. Like, I tend to not consume media where the dog dies just because I find it really upsetting. Like, it's just a personal preference, but it's like I know that can be off-putting for readers. So do you really want to shrink your audience if there's no for it?
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I almost think that extends to really anything,
Yeah,
anything in your writing, right? Is if it's not relevant to your plot, it's not helping push your characters forward. If it's not doing anything for your story, then you're writing it just for filler and that it doesn't need to be there anyways.
yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't stay with the reader, right? Like a gratuitous shock moment, that will shock somebody in the moment, but are they going to be thinking about it in a week or a month's time?
Yeah.
Yep, definitely. Well, the time flew. I mean, I still have a lot of, if I can remember them, I still have a lot of questions, but we do have a closing segment. Today's closing segment, which I didn't warn you about before, Adrienne. I apologize. We usually ask our guests, and then all of us get to answer it. Some sort of a question. Today's I didn't even have to ask Holly this time. Usually we have to discuss this stuff because we don't know what we're doing. But today I already have it. What's a fictional world we would want to live in?
Ooh.
And I feel like Adrienne, yeah, talking about your books, it's probably not your books. Probably not.
I joke about that. I'm like I'm useless at interacting with the physical world. So in a zombie apocalypse, I'd be the first to go.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, just off topic real quick. Nobody needs to hear this, but I was a cop for almost 24 years, and seeing a lot of dead bodies, 2 to 3 a week for over 20 years is a lot. Um, and I told my son, because him and his buddy, they just finished watching a zombie movie, and they said, "Oh yeah, we would have so much fun." I go, "Please believe me, if you really saw a dead, I'm not talking about like, well, sometimes in these zombie movies, they definitely looked at. I said, if one of these like skeletons stood up and started chasing you, you're gonna crawl into like a fetal position and just sob and just wait for it to happen. There is no freaking way I would want to live in a zombie world. Anyway, moving on. Um, anyone? Holly, do you have any?
Yeah, I would say living in like the Arthurian legends or like Camelot, because
Hmm.
that is something that I have always been obsessed with. My family is ridiculous. They used to go to all like the medieval times dinners, and our whole family would dress up in costumes. And to this day, our family still does themed dinners where we all dress up. Recently, we did an Outlander one,
Oh, fun.
complete with like kilts and fake swords, and like we're very extra in our family. But I've always had this obsession with that era, and so I feel like that, like the chivalry and just the king's court and the just all of it, I just love so much. And I think for me, that would be so cool. Of course, I wouldn't want to be like a peasant in this. I'm talking about like I want to be a princess or a duchess or something like that.
Right.
Someone with standing, so I'm actually at these events and not just
Yeah.
begging outside of them. That
Just
would
begging.
be that would be the world that I would live in.
Nice.
Amazing, and also I'm so jealous of those things. But
Uh,
Ursula Le Guin's rewriting of the Arthurian.
I haven't read it, but I've heard it's amazing.
I think you'd love it. Like, speaking of dark fantasy, like it's some of the best dark fantasy I've read. It's so good.
Hmm.
Um, I think I'd have to say I definitely would want to live like in a science fiction kind of world, just because I'd want to see all the different planets. And one of my favorites is Deathstalker by Simon R. Green, which is basically like ancient Rome, but in space. Um, I wouldn't want to be any of the main characters because no, that is far too, they have far too stressful lives. But there's a lot of exploration of ancient kind of alien ruins going on and that kind of stuff. And as as a former classicist, I love the idea of that. So
Hmm.
like that, I think for me. How about you, Bob?
I'm gonna be boring. I don't know. Part of me would love to just live in Rivendell, and I would be happy to be a servant there because I'm not an elf, so they probably need some humans to mop the floors or something. But that'd be amazing. But I think I would really enjoy what I write. My genre is steampunk, but yeah, it'd be like a Victorian era world where technology is a little bit more advanced. Well, probably like 50 years advanced, and then I just like that. I just like the steam, the zeppelins in the air, and just the way we dress. I want to dress in a tuxedo all the time. I want to look nice. I want to be a gentleman and have open the door for ladies and stuff like that. Um, there's just something aesthetically very very nice. I know in real life, you have the only two classes. You have that class, and then you have the ultra poor, and the all the bathroom is in the gutters, but which is why they put the coat on the floor for the lady to cross over. But anyways, that's where I would like to live. Besides the smell, but just being a guy, just hanging out with cigars and brandy after dinner or something like that. That looks fun.
Yeah, and the hats. They have excellent hats.
Yeah, they all get to wear these crazy hats. I can't walk around with a hat anymore like that. I'd get laughed at. Yeah, I can't walk into Walmart with one of these. Go out to supper dressed like that. They probably get escorted out.
Fairy Festival recently to sell my books, and they had loads of like steampunky stalls as well, where they were selling these extremely extravagant hats with, you know,
Oh
the
yeah.
on there, and like it was amazing. They looked beautiful, and I was so close to spending like most of my earnings on ab until I remembered, oh, I have
Oh,
Yeah,
nowhere to put this to.
right. Yeah, don't spend your money. I would do that every single convention I went to or book fair. I would make some money and then I would go around and look at books and go, oh, let me support this author. And I would have nothing at the end of the day. So just keep it all in your
yeah.
pockets. But okay, well, we had a lovely time with you, Adrienne. We don't want to take up too much of your evening there. Where can we find you again?
On Instagram and TikTok under just Adrienne_Miller_author. I'm quite active on both, and yeah, the advanced reader team for my new book is just open. So if you happen to spot a call on there, do feel free to sign up. And
Wonderful.
just on those two, and occasionally I post on my website as well. So, but that's all linked in my link tree, which you can find on Instagram.
Perfect. That's fantastic. Your books are on I'm sorry, Amazon. They are what was the names of your books again?
The Traveling City, Paladin and Necromancer, and Paladin and Necromancer 2. I got
Okay.
both titles.
All
I love
all
it.
dark fantasy, and then your next one is going to be dark science fiction.
Yeah,
Right
that's it.
on. Lovely. If that comes out in November, maybe we can have you out again for a book launch or something like that.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's such
Yeah.
a great time. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. We absolutely learned a lot about dark fantasy. I'm very happy about that. So folks, don't forget to subscribe to our channels at the links below so you don't miss any of the Writer's Realm content. We always love to hear from our listeners. So if you have a question or topic you want us to dive into, please get in touch. Until then, keep writing. Bye.